Standing in the middle of downtown Tempe, and I'm holding this lobster, and oh, we're back. Hey, so, yeah, welcome back. Mobile web application development alongside my cohort today, Jeremy Foster. I am Christopher Harrison. Jeremy, you did a lot of work there. Take a break. Power down. And I'm going to pick it up kind of with the same style that I've been using all day, which is really getting kind of a low level, letting Jeremy do the high level, and I'm getting very low level. And so what I want to take a look at in this module is some of the different APIs that are going to enable your app to work offline. Because again, the whole goal here, especially when you create that cool little shortcut so that way somebody could actually install that and tap on it, is that it still gives some level of functionality even while the user isn't connected to the internet. Now, before I get in and start talking about caching, start talking about local storage, session storage, it's definitely worth highlighting one very big thing, which is simply, this can be challenging. And, you know, make your life easier. You don't always need offline access. And if somebody knows that it's a web app, I think for the most part, they're going to accept decreased functionality when it's offline. So don't feel the need to make everything work even when the application is offline. So we were talking all the way back earlier this morning or this afternoon or this evening at the beginning of this MBA, for those of you who remember all the way back to then, yeah, quite a while ago. But if you remember all the way back, one of the things that we talked about is trying to focus users' attention on what's important. Same concept here. So don't think that you need to go off and implement everything offline. If you are going to enable some form of offline support, focus in on what's going to be important to the user, the big core features. So let's start digging in and taking a look at the different tools that are available to us for enabling offline data. So we're going to take a look at browser storage. We're going to take a look at caching and offline access. And SIR doesn't really belong in this section, but is going to be there anyway, is geolocation. But let's start off talking about storage. Now, I think that basically says it all.
I had one for lunch.
What's that?
I had one for lunch.
You did have, and I was very jealous. I had a brownie. I was very jealous. He had a cookie. But in any event, cookies are evil. Well, all right. Maybe they're not evil, but they're certainly not good. Because the problem with cookies is they're going to be small, they're easy to spoof, they can be hijacked, text only, there isn't a good API around it. We want to get away from using cookies. And this is where HTML5 comes to the rescue and gives us two brand new ways of storing data. Local storage, session storage. Now, what's cool about these? Well, first of all, it's a very simple API. And in fact, if you've ever used, say, the session object or the application object in ASP.NET, you actually already know, for the most part, how to use local storage and session storage. Very easy, very similar API. You're going to notice that it gives you the ability to store data in key value pairs. So basically think, hey, cool, I get a little table. Here's all my keys, and then there's all of my values. You're going to get up to 5 megs worth of storage, and maybe even 10 depending on the browser, which maybe doesn't necessarily sound like a whole heck of a lot. But when we're talking about browser storage, and especially when we're comparing this to 4K, this is huge. Oh, and by the way, one other great advantage that I don't have on the slide, but I want to highlight, is one of the things about cookies is that cookies are always sent back and forth from the client up to the server and then back down again. Local storage, session storage are going to stay in the browser. The other big thing about cookies, they're only able to store text. We can store objects, sort of. They will have to be converted into JSON in order to actually store them inside of there, but we can still do it. And then finally, last but not least, is this is going to give you better persistence than cookies ever did. Now, obviously, there's two objects here, local storage, session storage. So you're probably all wondering the exact same question. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that local storage is going to persist until deleted. Session storage is going to persist until the tab is closed. So not the browser window, but rather the tab. Now, what I really like about that is one of the biggest challenges in dealing with creating an app in today's day and age is the fact that tabs are ubiquitous. That you can just keep opening up tab after tab after tab after tab inside of a browser. And if I'm trying to create a browser-based app, we're going to be doing a lot of JavaScript, and I need to be able to store information, I don't want to have to keep track as maybe the user's on one page on one tab and a different page on a different tab. I don't want to have to worry about all of that. So fortunately, our session storage is going to be specific to the tab that the user is looking at. Okay, let's go in and take a look here at how we can do our local storage session storage. And I'm just going to real quick add HTML page storage. There we go. Okay, and let's go in and just create a real quick div. And by the way, label for equals name, name. And let's go ahead and say input and type equals text and name equals name. And that is perfect. And I want ID equals name. All right. Now, one of the things that I want to highlight, we talked about this again when we first got started, is kind of best practices and things that you should focus in on that are just good in general. One of the big things about label there is that label is going to make, in this case, my name text right there, a hotspot. So if you tap on that, it will automatically, in this case, put you into the text box that has the matching name, which, again, I've creatively called name. So it will automatically put you there. So that way you've kind of increased the space in which the user can do his thing. And you know, let me also do this real quick. Let me fire this up. And kind of make that nice and big. All right. So I'm going to bring up my touch keyboard here, and you'll notice it's just a basic, generic, everyday touch keyboard. Let me go back to Visual Studio, and I'm going to make one little change here. And I'm going to change this to email. And this is a question that I get asked, I think, constantly. How do I get the @ sign to appear inside the keyboard? Well, the @ sign is there because HTML5 email. And you'll notice now down there at the, and I'm not going to be able to zoom in on it. Shoot. There we go. In any event, you'll notice the @ and the .com in the lower right-hand corner there. And that automatically comes into play because of the fact that we said type equals email. Now, first of all, if you're ever going to set up a little text box that's going to accept email, always use that. Second of all, don't be afraid about the fact that that's HTML5 only, because if I go in and I just simply say type equals Wibble, and I launch this, what you're going to notice is that it still behaves just like a normal text box. So even if the browser doesn't support HTML5, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Okay. In any event, let me go back and say type equals text, and let's go ahead and say button type equals button. There we go, and save. Perfect. And then let's go ahead and add in another div, and I'm going to give this an ID session. And let's go ahead and say div, and I'm going to give this an ID local. Alrighty. Now, I am going to make my life a little bit easier here, and I am going to add in jQuery. I really don't need it for as simple of an app as this is going to wind up being, as simple as a demo as this is going to wind up being, but it's just going to make my life just that much easier. So in that way, I can just go right in, just simply say function like that, and let's go in and say this. Let's $paren, and I didn't give my button a name. ID equals save button. There we go. All right, so let's say save button, and let's go ahead and say click, and then let's go in and say local storage. Okay. Now, if I want to store something inside of local storage, then all I need to do is either A, say set item, and you'll notice this will take two parameters, a key, and then the data. So I could go in and grab my data, and let's actually do it this way. Var name equals $paren pound name, and yes, I know I need a pound there. I can hear people typing that in, and let's go in and grab the val. Perfect. So I could go in and store it that way, and that is perfectly acceptable. I could go in and do it that way. The other way that I could do it, and let's go in and just say session storage, is I could treat it like a collection. So I can set that to be whatever I want the value to be. So one of two ways that I can go in and set this up. And again, what I really like about this is if you've been doing, let's say, there we go. If you've been doing ASP.NET and you've been using the session object, or you've been using the application object, that syntax right there is the exact same thing. Pretty slick. All right, let me go in and create another real quick function here. I'm going to say function update display. There we go. And what I'm going to do is just simply $paren. Let's grab session, and let's set the text to be local storage. And I'm just going to go get item, and we'll kind of go that way. Name, and then again we'll do the compare and contrast. $paren pound local, and then we'll set the text there for session storage. And then again, we'll go in and grab name. So again, kind of keeping that same get set. You'll notice that I did get set here, and then I just did it as an array. And I could have very easily done it the other way around as well. It really doesn't matter how you do it. And then finally, let's say update display, and then let's say update display after you've updated the values. Okay, so now let's go in and let's say name and Christopher, and let's hit save. And sure enough, you're going to notice it says, of course, Christopher. All right. Well, now let me close that out and open this back up. And now you're going to notice right here that I've got Christopher. And I really should actually update my display real quick. Let's just update that to be a span tag instead. I love the IntelliSense that it will automatically fix your closing tag.
That's wonderful.
And I also love this, Control-K, Control-S for surround with.
Yep.
HTML, and I want a div tag there. And then let's say session, and then Control-K, Control-S, surround with HTML and div. And this is going to be my local. There we go. And let me just make sure. See, I knew I had a bug in my code. That's better. Okay. So now you'll notice in my session, it's clear. You'll notice in local that I've got Christopher. Let me also just update this. Let's say Jeremy with a silent T. There we go. So you'll notice Jeremy. Let's come over here and paste in that exact same URL. And what I want you to notice, separate tab here, is that the session over here, storing Jeremy, session over here is empty. Because again, that session object is going to be per tab, which is actually, I think, a very good thing. It makes having to develop against all of that much easier. So get away from using cookies. Start using local storage and session storage instead. That's what those are there for. Okay. Now, local storage, session storage are great because they're going to give you the ability to store data. But sometimes what I really want to do is I want to tell the browser, hey, hang on to this entire file. Just hang on to this image. Hang on to this JavaScript file. Hang on to this CSS. And that might be because I know I'm going to use it an awful lot, or it might be because I'm trying to enable offline support. You see, the thing is, browsers actually do a really good job of caching data. And I know a lot of web developers would almost say sometimes it does too good of a job. Because how many times have you gone in, made a fix, gone back to the browser, hit refresh, and you didn't actually see your fix implemented? And so you wind up, having to control F5 or close the browser down, actually clear out the cache, and then go back and do it that way. Browsers do a good job. But the problem is they don't always know what it is that's important. That just because a file is big doesn't necessarily mean it's important. Just because a file is accessed, actually, an awful lot, doesn't necessarily mean that it's important. What's important? Well, it's going to vary. It depends on what you're doing. It might be images, might be CSS, might be JavaScript, might be HTML, could be all sorts of different things. So if a browser is going to cache data, I want the ability to tell the browser what's important. And this is where our cache manifests come into play. Now, the cache manifest is an HTML5 spec. It does, of course, mean that not every browser is going to support this. And by the way, I should also highlight the fact that it's one manifest file per page, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. So in that way, if I want to enable offline support for a couple of different pages, I can set them up individually. The catch, of course, is maybe I just want to make sure that it's going to be hanging on to a couple of CSS files that I use across the entire site. So I want to go in and set those up. I will need to update every page with that cache manifest, but I can point multiple pages to that exact same manifest over here. So I can go in and do that. The other thing about the cache manifest is that it's a simple text file. So it's very easy to go in and set up. And in fact, you'll notice the basic structure right here. Now, you do need to say cache manifest. That's required. And you'll also notice that you can add in comments. So that way you could explain why a particular file is important. You could wind up with 27 8x10 color glossy photographs with circles and arrows and a paragraph on the back of each one explaining what each one was to be used as evidence against us. If anybody in the Q&A window gets that, I'm going to be very, very impressed. It's about the right time of year for that reference. In any event, so you can put in your own comments, and that's actually going to become important here in a couple of minutes. And then there's three basic sections inside of that manifest. Network, which is going to be the files that require server access. So they will not work without the server. And you're telling the browser every time you access this, I want you to go back to the server to go grab it. Which, besides just being able to cache, is probably the second most important thing, because there might be pages that update on a regular basis, and I want to make sure that the server always goes back. Cache is going to be the files that are going to be downloaded. I'm telling the browser, hey, I want you to hang on to this. And then finally, last but not least, is fallback. And these are the files that I want the server to use should we lose access to the network. So that way, if maybe I want to display a basic error page saying, sorry, you need to have network access, or maybe going back to what we were talking about earlier, about how instead of trying to implement every feature, I'm only going to implement 2 or 3, then maybe what I fall back to is a simplified JavaScript file that's going to implement only those couple of features that I want. Now, at first blush, you might be looking at the manifest file and you might be thinking, well, cool, that looks fantastic. Because now I get to tell the browser exactly what I want it to do, exactly what I want it to hang on to. The problem is there actually isn't a stock way to tell it when to refresh. You see, the thing is that once we've told the browser cache that file, that's what it's going to do. And the browser does not have a mechanism to go back to look to see whether or not that file has changed. Browsers don't like to delete things, and those file changes then may not appear. So if you are going to use caching, number one, cache static files. Things that you don't expect to change or things that you expect to change very infrequently. And number two is in order to tell the browser, hey, by the way, we need you to go download updated copies of these particular files, you have to update the manifest file. Now, what you might do, and this is typically the way that it's done, is add in a version comment. So you'll say cache manifest up at the very top, and then the first comment will be a version. Now keep in mind that this isn't a standardized way of doing things, but you've now created a change to the manifest. It will grab the manifest, it will see the fact that there's a change inside of there, and then it'll go grab the new files. Or at least it should. If it doesn't, there is an API that you can use to force it. Now the basic steps here are to go grab the application cache, tell it to update. Now what this update command will actually do is say, hey, go start downloading in the background. But it won't actually start using those new files until you tell it to use those files. So what I'm doing in this next block is I'm checking to see, hey, is that update ready? And if it is, then we'll go ahead and swap the cache. Okay, let's go in and take a look at our cache manifest here. So what I'm going to do, go back to Visual Studio here, and let me add in a brand new text file here. I'm just going to go with HTML file, and let's just go ahead and call this cache because I'm very creative. And cache, F2, and I'm going to call this app cache. Now, or app chance apparently. There is no stock extension. So I use app cache. You might use something else. Doesn't really matter. Call it Wibble because you're going to reference the entire thing by its full name. So again, up at the very top. Uh-oh. Please work. Okay, you know what? I'm going to take 2 seconds and I'm going to close out Visual Studio. Yeah.
That was perfect timing.
All right, and Christopher Demos. Thank you for calling the help desk. If you tried turning it off, turning it back on again. Okay, so I'm going to go in and throw in my cache manifest, and I'm going to add in version, and let's say 1.0.0.0. So that's going to be my, my little version there. Now, from here, I can do one of two things. I can absolutely break down those sections if I want. So I can have my cache section, my network section, and my fallback section. But if all you want to do is specifically state, hey, these are the files that I want you to grab, then you can just go in and say, well, hey, these are the files that I want you to grab. So maybe what I wanted to grab is cache.html, which I'm going to go back and create in a couple of minutes, images, and let's say MVA prep. And I'm going to go case sensitive MVA prep med.jpg. So those are the files that I'm going to want this to now cache. Cool. So now let me go in and create a brand new HTML page. Add HTML, and I'm going to call this cache. And inside of the HTML, I'm now going to say manifest equals / make sure that you use your absolute path here, cache, app cache. And now let me go ahead and drag out, I believe I used the medium image. I've got a great memory, it's just really short. Yep, I did, MVA prep med. Yep, perfect. All right, and so now I'm all set and ready to test this. So what I'm going to do So I'm going to fire this up. There's our lovely little image, and I'm going to hit refresh, and everything is working just fine. I'm now going to turn off my web server. So right-click, exit. Am I sure? Yes. I'm now going to right-click right here and hit refresh, give this a couple of seconds, and you'll notice that it still worked. And the reason that it still worked is because of the fact that I told the browser, hey, hang on to this file. So even though it wasn't actually able to connect to the server, it still worked just fine because of the fact that I told it, hang on to that file. Cool. All right. Now, last little thing. Geography. So when it comes to geography here, what we want to be able to figure out is where that user is. That again, what we're hoping to do is implement sort of that application feel without actually having an application. And this can be very helpful for scenarios where I need to help guide the user. One of the things, again, that we talked about at the beginning of the MVA is why not create an app? And one of the reasons that you might decide to either not create an app or add this functionality to your web application is because you don't necessarily want to require the user to install the application. One of the things that drives me crazy about a lot of businesses, and I see this constantly, is how difficult it is sometimes that businesses make it for me to give them my money. I have money. I want to give you my money. Make it easy. Take my money. And so many businesses fail at that. And one of the things that you can do is this, is let's say that we're a brick and mortar store. Well, if you navigate to our website, I want to make it very easy for you to give us your money. And one of the ways that I'm going to do that, Barry says he'll take it. One of the ways that I'm going to do that is by making it very easy for you to find our store. You're already on the site. I want to show you where our stores are in relation to you. And this is where that geography or geolocation object comes into play. So I want to show you our store locations. And maybe I even want to take it one step further and show you directions. Now, the thing about the geolocation object is it's going to show you the user location. Now, it is an HTML5 object. Now, you know, I have the ability to create code that will query a database. But you know what I don't know? I have no idea how to actually send a signal, how to tell Windows, these are the ones and zeros that I want you to send along the network. I have no idea what the API is that SQL actually uses to accept that connection and to take the SQL command and to eventually send the data back. And I have no idea how to read the ones and zeros off the wire. But you know what? I don't need to know any of that. Now, when we're talking about geolocation, how the device is going to figure out your location is going to vary. That it might be, I'm going to keep reaching for my little devices over here, it might be a phone. And in the case of a phone, it might be GPS, if the user's enabled that, or it might be triangulation based on cell towers. All right, well, maybe it's a tablet. Well, in the case of a tablet, it might be sort of guessing based on IP address and things like that. Well, I don't need to know. All I want to do is just simply say, hey, where's the location? There it is. How it actually works behind the scenes is completely irrelevant. Now, one big thing to note here is that the user is going to be prompted to provide us that location information. And by the way, again, going all the way back to module 1 here, remember how I said just because you know how to do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it. Same thing here. Just because you know how to do something doesn't mean that you should do it. I've seen a lot of sites lately that somebody figured out, hey, look, we can ask where the user is. And in particular, there's a couple of news sites that have been doing this. And I find that kind of creepy. You don't need to know where I am. Just display the news story that I've clicked on. If you don't actually have a need to figure out where the user is, don't ask the device where the user is. I think that's simple privacy 101, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now, as far as the methods that are available to us, we've got get position, which will get us the current position, and we've got watch position, which will give me the ability to track the user. Now, if I call get location, what I'm going to get inside of that success callback is I'm going to get the properties of the event, and in particular, the big one that I'm interested in is the coordinates. And from there, I'll be able to figure out the latitude, the longitude, the accuracy, so how close I think I am to that location, and even the altitude and the altitude accuracy. So let's go in and just kind of play with this real quickly here. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio, and let me just real quick add an HTML page and geolocation. And I'm just going to go in and do this. Script and geolocation dot. And then from here, now what I can do, where are my properties? Get position. Okay, so on get location, what I've actually got the ability to do is I have the ability to set up a set of parameters so I can tell it whether or not I want it to be a particular location. Hold on one second. Why am I failing on this? Yeah, see, I was right the first time. Never doubt yourself. Okay, in any event, so I'm going to go geolocation. Location. Now, off of my geolocation, I am going to have the ability to just simply say get location. And from that get location, I can then add in my event data, and then off of that, I'll now have the ability to get my event data and to get my coordinates. And then from here, I can get the latitude and my event data, chords, and I can get my longitude. Now, here's the thing that I want to mention about my geolocation and the latitude and the longitude is the bad news is that that's all that that's going to give me. The only thing that it's going to give me is just that geolocation and nothing else. So if I wanted to, say, display this on a map, that's something I'm going to have to implement on my own. All right. So a couple of objects that we've taken a look at here. We've seen how we could go in, store things inside of our local storage, session storage, local storage forever, session storage for an individual tab. We saw how we could actually cache full pages by using app cache. And then we also talked a little bit about how we could get in and do our geolocation. So really, those are a couple of big building blocks that you're going to need to go in and start appifying. I'm going to kind of go with you and Angular, you know, so appifying your web application and making it more like a local app. All right. Now, up until now, we've been doing everything local. Wouldn't it be nice to prove that all of this actually works?
Sure.
Wouldn't it be nice to actually take all of this and put this up onto Azure? All right. What do you say we take 10? We'll come on back and we'll see how to do it.